G'day gamers, Ranger Tony here with another Pathfinder Kingmaker build video. Today we're going to look at a strength-based 2-weapon ranger. So you're going to be dual-wielding, weapon in each hand. This works, of course, with the 2-weapon combat style. As I said in my intro to Ranger video, it also works with the sword and shield weapon style if you want to consider your offhand weapon a shield. I'm going to be talking mostly about the 2-weapon combat feats that are available. So because this is a strength-based build, it's going to be very similar to our 2-handed weapon ranger build. Starting off with races, human of course, as always, is a good race for almost any class. The +2 to 1 ability score is helpful. You get an extra feat at first level, which is always great, and you get an extra skill point per level, so that comes in handy. Again, as with the 2-handed weapon ranger, the elf is not the best choice here because you get a -2 constitution, but overall it's not too bad. You could take your 2 points from intelligence and move them into constitution as an example and go with that. So if you want to play an elf, do that. Probably the best race after humans are the dwarves because they have a bonus to wisdom, which is one of the prerequisites for a ranger, and you're going to be a frontline fighter, so a bonus to constitution is nice as well. Again, the gnomes and halflings being small races with deficits to strength, you're not going to be as effective, and your weapons, the smaller size weapons that you use, are going to do less damage. Having said that, they can still be fun to play, so if that's what you want to do, go ahead, it'll be good. Half elf and half orc are very similar to humans in a way. They both get the +1 to 1 ability, so that gives them a good start. +2 to 1 ability, and half elves get the adaptability, which allows them to focus on one skill. Half orcs, same as humans, get 1 skill per extra skill point per level. So with Asimir, as we saw with the 2-handed ranger, the Angelkin works well with a bonus to strength and intelligence, although you don't need intelligence for this build. Probably the better one is Lawbringer with constitution and wisdom. As per usual, I'm going to go back to human. So we're going to pick ranger. Now, which of the archetypes are suitable here? Again, like we saw with the 2-handed ranger, Stormwalker is only the only combat style they have is archery, so you're not going to be able to use that. The rest of them will work well. Once again, freebooter, you have to be aware that the freebooter's Bane skill that you get uses a movement action to use it, so that if you are a distance away from your opponents and you decide to use that ability, you're not going to be able to move in that round, and so you're always going to be the last person into combat, sort of thing. So be aware of that. Otherwise, it works well as a ranger, a freebooter, or a flame warden. I'm just going to pick the standard ranger here. The build is the same for any of those classes, any of those archetypes. So again, if you have a racial bonus, immediately put it into strength, because this is a strength build. And we're going to set the strength to 18. As I say with all rangers, you make a decision as to whether you want to use spells or not. If you don't want to use spells, leave your wisdom at 10 and put your points wherever. If you do, I recommend setting the wisdom to 14, which is a good start. You can get magic items, or you can add points to that later if you want to go higher, but you need at least 14 to be able to access all 4 levels of ranger spells. You get them very slowly, so you've got plenty of time to increase your wisdom higher if you need to. It also means you could start with, say, a wisdom of 12 or 13 if you wanted to sacrifice, get a few extra points to put somewhere else at the start. On this build, I'm then going to recommend going to a 14 dex and a 14 constitution. Give me a little bit of extra armor class with the dex, and the constitution is important because I'm going to be in the front line, so I want some extra hit points. Skills here, nothing really different from normal because I'm playing the leader. I think Persuasion is a good skill to have. Rangers, being wisdom based, will do well with Perception. They also will do well with Law and Nature, which is you need to have at least one party member with a decent skill in that to be able to hunt while you're camping. Knowledge World and Knowledge Arcana are both intelligence-based skills, and just in case you're not aware, you can notice that they highlight when you mouse over the different attributes. So the last 2 points for the Ranger, I'm probably going to recommend Athletics and Mobility. You could put it into Trickery, put a point into Trickery if you wanted to have someone as a backup to be able to pick locks and do traps in case your primary person failed. I usually use Lindsay for that, but having someone else with some skill in Trickery is always useful. And I don't really use Stealth much, but you could definitely do that. Rangers get a bonus to Stealth to begin with anyway, so that would be useful. Okay, moving on. Before I get too far into the feats though, I'm going to talk about equipment. So armor, the best option you've got there is, because you can use light and medium armor, your best option is to stick with the breastplate, which is medium armor. It is the best medium armor in the game. See my armor tutorial video for details about it, but it gives you 6 points of armor class, and you can add up to 3 points of dexterity onto that, giving you a total of 9, which means your base armor class will be 19. Your base armor class of 10 plus your armor will take you to 19, sorry. So that's a good option. Later on, as you get access to more enchanted sets of armor, you may decide to go down to some lighter armors, or you might just keep looking for the enchanted breastplates. Weapon choices are interesting for dual wielding. So the first thing to note is when you take two weapons and use them together, you are going to get a penalty to your attack rolls. Now, if you don't have the two-weapon fighting feat, the two-weapon combat feat, which you will get at second level through the combat style, but if you don't have that available to you, then you're going to get a -4 on your main hand weapon and a -8 on your offhand weapon, and potentially a -10 if that offhand weapon is a medium-sized weapon. So unfortunately, the game doesn't tell you what weapons fall into what size categories. So you have small weapons like the dagger, the kukri, the short sword. I think the light pick might be considered a small weapon. The light mace, things like that. Then you have medium-sized weapons, which include things like rapiers, scimitars, long swords, battle axes. Sorry, I missed hand axe is a small weapon. But long swords, battle axes, scimitars, rapiers, all of those sorts of things are generally considered medium weapons. Now, I might be wrong about rapier, because rapier is the one weapon that you can use. It is sort of considered one of the weapons that is small enough or light enough to be used in either hand. But any other weapon that's larger, if you use it in your offhand, so if you're right-handed and you put that in your left hand, you're going to get the higher penalty. So you'd have -4 on your primary hand and -10 on your offhand. Once you get the two-weapon combat feat, however, at level 2, when you take that from your combat style, that penalty drops significantly. So if you're using just small weapons, so you're using daggers or kukris or short swords or hand axes or light maces or light picks, you're going to get a -2 to each hand. So two-handed weapon combat smooths out the penalties so that they apply the same on both hands, but also it severely reduces those penalties. If, however, you have a -2 for small weapons. If you have a large weapon in your main hand and a small weapon in your in your offhand, sorry, you still get -2. So that's good. But if you go medium weapon, so for example, 2 longswords, 2 battle axes, whatever, you'll get -4 to both weapons. Okay? So that's the trade-off. You have to decide, am I going to run around like a badass with 2 longswords and fight, or am I going to go with, say, 2 rapiers or 2 short swords, 2 daggers, whatever, and do a bit better chance to hit? Okay? Personally, I tend to go for the small weapons so that I've got the better chance to hit, but you could go for the larger weapons for the more damage, but you're going to hit a little bit less often. Because you've got to remember that those weapons do different damages as well. So your daggers generally do 1d4 of damage. That includes the kukri, also does 1d4. Then once you get to the short sword and the light mace, the hand axe, they all do 1d6 of damage, as does the rapier, as does the scimitar. And by the way, scimitars are not considered a small weapon, so if you dual wield scimitars with the 2 weapon feat, you'll have -4 penalties, not -2. So sorry, Dritz, but you're not as good as you think you are. And from there, if you want to go up to battle axes, long swords, heavy picks, heavy maces, they all do 1d8 of damage. And then you've got the exotics. So if you are willing to spend a point in exotic weapons, you could pick some more exotic things like Bastard Sword. You can dual wield Bastard Swords. But the best option is to go for the 2-bladed sword. Now that's the whole sci-fi fantasy trope. Take the 2-bladed lightsaber from Star Wars and bring it back to a fantasy and try and make that work. I personally think it's ridiculous, but I've played it before in Neverwhere Nights 1, for example. And I've tested it here as well. It's an okay option. The advantage of using the 2-bladed sword is, so it's essentially a small inner handle, small staff-like handle with 2 sword blades, one sticking out either end. And you spin it around and all that sort of stuff, just like you saw in the Star Wars movies. Now, the advantage of using that over, say, 2 longswords, it does the same amount of damage, 1d8 per attack, same amount of damage, but there's 2 advantages to using that weapon. One, it's a single weapon. So if you get an enchanted 2-bladed sword, you're doing enchanted attacks and damage with both blades on that. Whereas if you have a longsword that is +1, only one of your attacks is going to be +1. If the other one is a normal sword, you're not going to get that bonus. So you've got to find 2 enchanted weapons to get that sort of advantage. The other advantage of using the 2-bladed sword is that it reduces that -4 penalty for using a medium weapon down to the same as using 2 light weapons. So your penalty for attack with a 2-bladed sword is only -2, not -4. Some people will think that is well worth spending the extra feat to get the exotic weapons proficiency. So you would pick exotic weapon proficiency and you would pick 2-bladed sword here. Personally, I'm not that fond of it that I would go down that route, but it is going to do a little bit more damage overall. The weapon choice that you pick should also be considered based on the fact that when you're using a single weapon, there are a number of feats available to you that can improve the amount of damage that you do. Power attack is one of them, and I recommend taking that for this build. But there are other feats as well that you can sometimes use which no longer work with dual wielding. So you've got to be aware of that. So the main way that you're going to be able to increase your damage with dual wielding is via critical hits. So you want to be able to get as many of the critical hit features as you can. And so for that reason, I recommend going down the path of picking any weapons that do higher crit ranges, higher critical hit abilities. So the short sword, for example, is a 19 or a 20 critical hit, as opposed to the hand axe, which is just a 20. So I would pick the short sword over the hand axe. The rapier is a 18, 19 or 20 for its criticals, so it's even better. So technically dual wielding rapiers is probably the best way to go. If you didn't mind the extra 2 points of penalty on your attacks, you could dual wield scimitars because they have the same critical range. And there are some exotic weapons that have good crit ranges as well that are single-handed, but I'm not going to go into them. We'll just stick with the normal weapons. So personally, I would go with short sword or rapier as my choice for weapons. Rapier has a little bit better crit range. It's only a piercing weapon. Short sword is now a slashing weapon in Pathfinder Kingmaker. So you've got that. So that's my suggestions for weapons. Okay, so what feats would I suggest now that we've talked about weapons? Well, you're going to get the standard 2-weapon feats available. You're going to be able to take those from level 2 onwards. Be aware that the 2-weapon combat style has 1 less feat than most others, and 2 less than a couple. There's a couple that have even more. So you're going to be able to take 2-weapon combat, which is down here because I don't actually. So you're going to be able to take 2-weapon fighting. Normally you need a dex of 15 for that, which I don't qualify for at the moment, but that's fine. I'll be able to take it anyway. And then you'll be able to take. Well, shield bash is one option that's available, but you don't want that because it. Unless you want to do shield stuff, but double slice is the other one. This, because on your offhand weapon, you're only allowed to use half of your strength modifier. This gives you back your full strength modifier on your offhand. So you're going to want to take that as soon as possible. Probably not take shield bash, and then later on, you get improved 2-weapon fighting down here, which you get a second attack with your offhand, and then eventually you can get greater 2-weapon fighting, which gives you your 3rd attack for your offhand weapon. Meaning that by the time you get that, you'll be able to do 6 attacks, at least 6 attacks per round, depending on what your base attack bonus is, etc. So the other feats that you're going to want to take have to go around all this. So I definitely recommend taking weapon focus first. Now this is the other thing I forgot to mention in the weapons section. Ideally you want to pick just one weapon. Sure, you could have a longsword in one hand and a dagger in the other, but it means that if you want to get the most out of your weapons, in particular to do with criticals, you need to get weapon focus in every weapon, or you need to get critical focus in each of those weapons. That means you're basically having to double up on a lot of skills. So you're better off finding a weapon that you like to use and using it in both hands. So I recommend taking weapon focus in the weapon you want, and I'm going to pick short sword at this point. There we go. And then what's my next thing that I should take? Well, I can't take any of the other 2-weapon fighting feats because I don't have enough dexterity to take them. Now, what else could I take? Well, I recommend at this point taking power attack. So power attack will give you another -1 penalty to your attack rolls, but it'll give you a +2 bonus to your melee rolls, except it won't. Because if you're using a weapon in your offhand, it reduces that by 1. You only get half of the bonus. So you get 50% of that. So you will get a -1 penalty to attack, and you'll get a +1 bonus to damage. But that's still good, because you're getting a +1 to both weapons. And every 4 levels, every 4 points of base attack bonus that you get, the penalty increases by 1 and the damage also increases by 1. So that can be a good thing. So just turn that on, leave it on, and if you find you're not attacking, you're not hitting very well, maybe turn it back off. But leave it on most of the time and you'll do that little bit of extra damage. Now there's really nothing else that you can take at this point for extra damage. You can't take things like Piranha Strike. Well, you could take things like Piranha Strike, but you'd have to take Weapon Finesse as well. Now there's no dexterity requirement for Weapon Finesse. So technically, even with a dexterity of 10, you can take Weapon Finesse. All it will then do is give you the prerequisite for some other skills. And the other skill that I'm talking about here is Piranha Strike. So you might want to take this because Piranha Strike does essentially the same thing as Power Attack. And it has the same penalties as Power Attack. The problem is you can't use both at the same time. So it's not really worth taking Piranha Strike if you don't want to take Power Attack. But if for whatever reason you decide you don't want to take Power Attack, take Weapon Finesse and Piranha Strike. But remember, that's 2 feats to do the same as 1. So I'm not sure I could really recommend that at this point. You can't take things like Slashing Grace because you need Weapons Finesse. So you could take Weapon Finesse and then take Slashing Grace, but Slashing Grace also doesn't work with dual wielding. So yeah, we won't even bother with that one. Really, it's now anything else that is useful. Now, what you don't want to take is Cleave. So most people, if you're doing a two-handed weapon build, you will take Power Attack, and then at some point afterwards, you will take Cleave. Now, if you're familiar with Neverwinter Nights 1 and 2, which I am intimately familiar with, that was a very common thing. You'd take Power Attack, and immediately, as soon as you could, you'd take Cleave, because what it would do is, after you attacked an opponent, if you killed them, you got a free attack at the next opponent, if there's one within range. And then Greater Cleave, if you killed that second opponent with your Cleave attack, then you could cleave again and again and again as long as you kept killing someone. Cleave in Pathfinder Kingmaker doesn't work that way. Cleave in this is when you make a standard single attack against a foe within reach. When you hit, you get to make an additional attack against another opponent. Sounds great because you don't have to kill them, you just have to hit them. But it's the single attack that's the problem. If you're dual wielding, you're not making a single attack, you're making 2 attacks. And there's no way as a dual wielder to say, I want to make just a single attack this round. So what happens is, you turn on Cleave, you either use it as a single use ability where you just click on it and say cleave this opponent, and for that next round it'll make a single attack at that opponent, and if you hit them you'll get a free attack at someone else. But it's also a skill that you can, a feat that you can turn on and leave on. So you can right click on it, it'll pop out at the side on the left hand side, and you'll be able to have it always turned on. If you do that as a dual wielder, as a 2-weapon fighter, you will only ever attack with your main hand, and your other weapon is useless. So for that reason, I really don't recommend using Cleave. In the Neverwinter Nights games, you didn't have to specify Cleave. As soon as you had it, it was always on, and it didn't affect your ability to wield 2 weapons. You could still do Cleave even though you had 2 weapons available. You cannot do that in Pathfinder Kingmaker, so don't go down the Cleave route, leave it alone. So instead, at first level, if you take Weapon Focus, the next things that I recommend taking are anything that's going to give you extra hit points, extra dodge, extra initiative. So you can look at dodge, you can look at improved initiative, endurance isn't bad, you can look at toughness. All of those are good. Then, once you've got your 2-weapon fighting, first of your 2-weapon fighting feats, you should have the prerequisites that you need to be able to start adding more of the 2-weapon feats. But those are the main things you're going to go for. You're going to be a little bit sparse on direct combat-related feats as a 2-weapon strength-based ranger. As I said, you can't cleave. It's only crits that you're going to be able to use, essentially, to improve your damage, with the exception of power attack. So you're going to want to improve your strength as much as possible. Anything to boost your strength is what you're going to want. And then look for your feats that you can use that will help with damage or protection or health. So I didn't pick my second focus here, did I? So I'm going to pick improved initiative at this point. And then finally, a favourite enemy. As I always say here, this is very dependent on how you want to play. Anything which covers a large group of opponents that you know might appear a lot in the game works well. Reptilian humanoids is a good option. Undead is a good option. Outsiders are always hard enemies, so that's a good option. As are monstrous humanoids and magical beasts. There's a lot of humans as opponents, so that's always a good option. Giant humanoids, there are some in the game, so that'll be good. Fae, I'm led to believe there's a lot of those in the game, so that's quite good. There is at least one dragon that I've heard of, so that might be a good option. Aberrations is another good one that covers a lot of groups. I really don't recommend picking things like animals, because while there's a lot of them in the game, they don't attack you as often as other things, so maybe at a higher level you could pick it, but I wouldn't necessarily take it all the time. So I'm going to pick reptilian humanoids here, and that's pretty much it, because we're at the point of naming our character and going on from there. So strength-based rangers, keep to light weapons if you want the least penalty to your attack rolls when you're dual wielding. Keep to the same weapon in both hands, because then you'll have to use less feats to be able to cover them for things like criticals and weapon focuses. And look for weapons that can crit more. So pick your short swords, long swords, rapiers, or scimitars if you want to go down that route. Or if you want to play it really interesting, definitely pick a human for this one and do the two-bladed sword. So get the exotic weapon proficiency first in two-bladed sword, and then weapon focus in that, and that will serve you well. Don't go down the cleave route. Don't really go down weapon focus or any of the dex-based slash and grace, piranha strike, any of those. They're not going to help you. Stick to your power attack for extra damage. It's only 1 point per weapon, but it's better than nothing. And of course, above all, have fun with it. So leave me comments on your builds, and share and like the video if you liked it. I will see you on the next video. Have fun. Keep playing games. Thanks. Bye.